Okay, welcome everyone. This is our last class in the series on the Sefirot. Did we cover everything that we could? We just the tip of the iceberg here. But the idea was to do many, many different subjects. So hopefully everyone who wasn't so familiar with the Sefirot now have a basic grounding in the Sefirot, and those who were familiar with them hopefully gained new insight. Tonight we're going to, it's kind of like a review, and the focus will be on one particular chart, which I'll show you in a minute, and I'll tell you the background of it, and then we're going to go through a number of things that we learned already very, very quickly, because I want to end the series with the idea that I presented, that even though the concept of using the Sefirot as a model, a paradigm, an organizational paradigm in which to make connections and see a holistic view of whatever the subject is. There's no doubt that Rabbi Ginsburg has brought it to a whole different level. So I myself am just very, very turned on to the idea of seeing ideas, concepts, names, words in the full spectrum connected to the Sefirot. So we're going to do, I'm going to show many, many different examples, and we're not going to delve deeply into them, but I just want to show how many different kinds of ways the Sefirot can be used in order to see a flow in different ideas. But we're going to start with a chart. I'm going to bring it up now. There we go. 1 second. I'll do it like this at the end. Okay, we'll start like this. This is called the Jewish experience. For those who were here last week, we did what I consider one of the most important models that Rabbi Ginsburg has presented was the Torah Academy, where because Rabbi Ginsburg has spent so much time and effort in taking the idea of uniting Torah wisdom with secular knowledge. And we went through all kinds of different arts and sciences and professions and saw how they match up with the Sefirot as a model for a Jewish university that would blend and combine and unify the very best of Jewish wisdom and secular knowledge. The chart that we're going to do tonight is called the Jewish experience, and I want to explain how it came into being. It was a very, very special experience for me. As I said, I'm just very, very turned on to this idea of being able to organize ideas according to the Sefirot. Not only is it mystical, but it's very practical, because we have so much stimuli coming into our brains and so much information and so many ideas. It's very hard to organize them in our minds so that we remember them and we can integrate them properly. So for me, the idea of organizing an idea, a word, concept, according to the Sefirot, allows me to really remember the ideas because I have a framework. I have a model. So having said that, Rabbi Ginsburg has developed thousands of these kind of models in his different talks over the years. So I was working on one myself about Jewish meditation. And I was starting to develop a way to see many different types of meditation according to the Sefirot. So I'm going back well over 20 years now. Rabbi Ginsburg had finished a class in Jerusalem, and I was driving him home to Kfar Chabad. And I told him about my attempt to make a model about meditation. All I can tell you, the ride took about 45 minutes, but in the back and forth between us, we expanded the idea of this meditation to the idea of all Jewish experience. And we had in mind the idea of, in a sense, a curriculum for education that would be based on a holistic approach to Judaism, trying to take all the different aspects of Judaism according to the Sefirot and creating an experience of education. And so at that time, Rabbi Ginsburg started a women's seminary. And it lasted for about 3 years. The first 2 years, there was a lot of learning how to do it. And everything. By the third year, we were like in a flow. It was really, really starting to happen. And we were using this as a loose, non-formal like curriculum as to what we wanted to give to the young women in the seminary over the course of a year, that it should be a well-rounded experience. And what happened is the Intifada, this is in the year 2000, 2001 happened. It was very traumatic, a very traumatic 3 years. And basically, parents pulled their children back home because it was actually quite dangerous here. It was really a very traumatic time, the Intifada. This is actually what was called the second Intifada. So that ended that experiment. But tonight I want to go fairly quickly, and we're going to see some complementary sharing with the Torah Academy here. So we're going to start here at the top. As we've learned this whole time, there are 3 levels to Keter. This is the crown, Keter. And the highest one is called Emunah, faith. And here, this is also in the Torah Academy, the highest level was learning about faith. And here also, that without faith, faith is in a sense at the top of the pyramid. Without faith in God, in the Torah, in Jewish law and Jewish tradition, so you end up empty. In a sense, everything is based on faith, but here we're not talking about blind faith. We're talking about a faith that is built on everything that we know to be true. So each one of these has a verse. And here in English, it's, and the righteous one shall live by his faith. Sadiq be'emunato yichiyah. Sadiq be'emunato yichiyah. The righteous one will live by his faith. All Jewish life is dependent on faith. And here, it's the idea of learning about faith. And faith incorporates everything. In other words, everything we're going to learn about has an aspect of faith to it. The next head of Keter is Ta'anug, pleasure. And this is connected to Shabbat and holidays. And the verse here this is from Isaiah. Then shall you delight over God, which is Az titaneg al Hashem. You'll have pleasure in Hashem. So we know that the way we describe Shabbat is called Oneg Shabbat, the pleasure of Shabbat. And so holidays, we say it's simcha, joy, and Shabbat is pleasure. Obviously, there's a deep, deep connection between the two. So here, the idea is not just learning about Shabbat, but obviously doing Shabbat. And in an educational framework, the doing Shabbat with friends and family and a big group. For many, many years, I had the great privilege, literally around the world, of participating in Shabbatons for sometimes hundreds of people, sometimes 100 people, sometimes 50, sometimes 20. And in our own home, we hosted hundreds of Shabbatons over the years, quite literally. And when you get a lot of people together who are singing together, learning together, sharing together, it's oneg. It's such a pleasure for the soul. Again, we're doing this relatively quickly so we can get as much in as possible. And the level of will, ratzon. So here we put song and dance. Now this is interesting because in the Torah Academy, will was connected to art, all types of art. And we explained there that the word for art is umanut, which is the same root as here, as emunah, as faith. And here we see that faith here means faith in one's own talents, faith in the gifts that God gives us. But when we develop them through ratzon, through will. And so here, obviously, music is one of the arts, dance is one of the arts. And to be able to take an idea, a feeling, an artistic, creative urge, and make something of it is really the epitome of will. And it can apply to almost any profession. Someone wants to be a doctor. This is just an example. You could use many other things. It takes tremendous willpower because the doctor has to be in school for what, how many years? 10 years with residency and everything. And with student loans going into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. But this person wants to be a doctor, So mastering anything is an art. And here, each person has their song, has their individual song. So not the verse, but the concept here is all masters of song transcend in song and are drawn down in song. There's a famous story of the Alter Rebbe. Perhaps in the second session, I'll have time to tell it. If someone will remind me, I'll be able to tell it. Here in wisdom, chachma. So this is an obvious thing. It's Torah learning. And the verse here is from the Zohar. Torah is revealed from wisdom. Oraita mechachma nafkat. Torah comes out of wisdom. So this is an obvious idea. So this is an obvious one, that Torah learning. Now, obviously, this is a curriculum in a sense, or an example for all of us of a well-rounded way of living it's the Jewish experience. So obviously Torah learning is primary, is critical. Here in Bina, we have meditation. And the reason is because one of the words for Jewish meditation is hit bonanut, which comes from the word Bina. And we've learned that the inner aspect of Bina is simcha. And so there is a deep, deep joy that comes from meditation, meditating. And there are many, many ways to meditate, but all of them have to do with touching on a very deep inner joy that's connected to peace of mind, a peace in the heart. And here the verse is Bina liba uba halev mevin. This comes from the Tikkun Zohar, where Bina is described as understanding is the heart, and through it the heart meditates. That's the expression used in the Zohar, and that's why meditation is so connected to Bina. The next one is a critical one, and actually one of the great innovations of the Hasidic movement. And this in Dat comes from a verse, know him in all of your ways. This is knowing God in all life's activities. One of the greatest teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and his students was that we should not divide our lives into what we'll call our spiritual pursuits and our mundane pursuits, because that creates kind of like a schizophrenic view of the world. Excuse me. Here the idea is based on a pasuk, B'chol derachecha de'ehu. In all of your ways, know him. So the Baal Shem Tov and all of his students taught everything that we do in life has a spiritual element to it, has a spiritual seed perspective to it. Whether we're working in the garden, we're washing the dishes, we are going for a walk, we're teaching our children, we're making something, we're cooking, whatever it is, all of life's activities is an opportunity to connect to God, to connect to the soul. This is one of the primary teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. B'chol derachecha de'ehu. In all of your doings, all of your ways, you can come to know God. In Chesed, this is an obvious one. This is love of Israel and doing good deeds. And through that, love of all people and all creation. And it comes from Chesed Avraham. It's a verse that Chesed is attributed to Avraham. Avraham is always connected to Chesed. And here, Chesed is just a very, very big part of the overall Jewish experience, that it's very, very important to be involved in Chesed in one way or another. It could be your time, it could be your money, it could be your expertise, it could be being part of a community, visiting the sick, taking care of orphans, etc., etc. In Gevura, so this is called introspection. Now, obviously, you see Gevura is under Bina. And so introspection, we'll call it the other side of the coin of meditation. But here, it's also connected to more than just meditation. It's also what's called cheshbon nefesh, of a personal accounting of who we are, where we're going in life, what is our relationship with God, what is our relationship with other people. And this comes from a pasuk. It's interesting because for those who participate in our Sunday class, we just learned this pasuk on this Sunday, 2 days ago. And Yitzchak went out to converse. And here Rav Ginsburg puts in introspection in the fields. In other words, speaking to God as a method of deep introspection, where we share with God all of our, not just our problems and our needs and our desires, but we share our inner being with God, and that gives us an opportunity to check out who we are and where we're going in life. Then we come to Tiferet, and this is the performance of mitzvot, and this is connected to beauty is Tiferet Yisrael. And so there's a concept it's actually in Jewish law, which is called Hidur Mitzvah, making mitzvot beautiful. When we do a mitzvah, there's this idea we should do it in the most beautiful way possible. That's why if we buy a special cup to make kiddush for on Shabbat, we buy a special challah cover. We have special table covers for Shabbat. We try to have the most beautiful Chanukiah at Hanukkah time. We try to buy the most beautiful Arba Minim, the 4 species for Sukkot. So here, Tiferet is beauty. And the idea is to learn how to do mitzvah, not by rote and not only from obligation. Of course, mitzvot are an obligation, but to do them in the most beautiful way possible. Then we come to Netzach, and here it's education, and this is exactly the same place in the Torah Academy, is in Netzach, because Netzach has to do with eternity and learning how to orchestrate our lives, because Netzach also comes from the root lenatseach, to orchestrate. And so education, first of all, education doesn't stop in 12th grade or at a master's or at a doctorate. Education is, you see, it's right under learning Torah. Learning Torah continues throughout life. We should never outgrow the idea that there's so much to learn. Like I said in the beginning about the Surah, we just barely touched the surface. So it's an eternal, ongoing effort on our parts. But it's also learning how to educate our children, how to educate in the workplace, how to reach out to other Jews and help educate them, how to reach out to the whole world and educate them. Education is a profession. There's skills. In Hod, also very similar to the Torah Academy, is business. And the verse here is, did you conduct business honestly? Nasata v'natata be'amuna. We have a tradition given over in the Talmud that when we leave this world and we get to the coming world, we'll be asked a series of questions. And one of the most important ones is, did you conduct business honestly? That's how important it is. And we know in the world, it's such a cutthroat kind of world where profit becomes the most important thing. And many times morals and ethics go by the wayside in the attempt to make as much profit as possible. So in Torah, there's no problem with being rich and having money, but it has to be done honestly It has to be done with morals and ethics, and many, many mitzvot in the Torah are based on doing business honestly. And so there are many, many laws to learn about when you relate with other people. We're constantly doing business. You don't have to own a business. Every time we buy something, or we sell something, or we have a partnership, or we loan someone something, or we borrow something, there are many, many laws that are important to learn. When we get to Yesod, it's what's called Shalom Bayit, domestic tranquility. And the reason that it's here in Yesod is there's no doubt that the foundation of Judaism is the home. Some people think it's the synagogue. The synagogue is very, very important, but nothing is more important as a foundation for Jewish life than the home. And of course, the home depends on domestic tranquility. And then we finish here with prayer. And this comes from a verse from David HaMelech, who says, Va'ani tefillah, I am prayer. Meaning, prayer is not just something that I do. Prayer is what I am. I am a constant expression of prayer. I want to be an ongoing, constant being in a state of prayerfulness. So here, what's interesting is we have this concept that the end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning in the end. So here we end with prayer, and it's connected to faith above. The top is always connected to the bottom here. So just to wrap this up, okay, so just to wrap this up, the idea of the Jewish experience, again, is to take all of Torah and to be a fulfilled, complete person, we need to activate all these different things. In other words, let's say we leave out doing chesed. I'm too busy. I don't want to part with my money. I don't want to part with my time. Well, then there's something missing. If someone learns Torah all the time, but when it comes to prayer, they just kind of like knock it off. Something's missing. If someone, like the Slonim Rebbe says that someone can keep all the laws of Shabbat, and get no joy out of it. So he says this person, when they leave the world, they will inherit the world to come. But in the world to come, there'll be a park bench. This is what he said. It sounds like the Slonim Rebbe said this. He did in a number of places in the Tivat Shalom. What did he mean? Just like this person's Shabbat was like stagnant, like a park bench. So that's what we'll get in the world to come. So we just went through what's called the Jewish experience. Meditation is very, very important. It could be a 1-minute meditation. It could be what we call kavana, have a good kavana before we do a mitzvah or when we're davening. But anyways, here again was an example of taking the Sefirot and showing an activity within the Jewish experience that relates to that Sefira. Okay, now what we're going to do is, this is almost like a review. I'm going to show you a bunch of charts. Some of them we've learned already, and some of them I'm just like really in 1 or 2 minutes going to try to explain what it is and just show different ways how the Sefirot can be used as an organizational tool, how the sages used it, how the Kabbalists used it. In other words, I never claimed that Rabbi Ginsburg made up this whole method. These methods go back thousands of years. But what I did say is Rabbi Ginsburg has brought it to a whole different level. Okay, so we're going to go back to share screen here. Here we go. So many of these you'll recognize. Many of these I shared on our WhatsApp. And if anyone is out there and has not joined our WhatsApp group, please do, because there's a lot of supplementary materials that go up twice a week. We try to do it every Monday and Thursday. So this was practically the first model that we used, and this is the 10 Sefirot and the 22 Hebrew letters connecting them. And if you remember, this is how the Sefer Yetzirah begins, with 32 pathways of wisdom. And then it goes on. God created the world through the 22 letters and the 10 Sefirot. So this is an incredibly important model. And this is what sometimes this particular model is called the DNA of the universe, because the way Kabbalah looks at the building blocks of creation are the 22 letters and the 10 Sefirot. So this is a very, very important model, maybe close to one of the most important, because the Sefirot and the letters, they are the building blocks of everything. So that was one of the first models that we learned. Okay, this next one is how the body is arranged according to the model of the Sefirot. And this is an amazing thing, because it really works. Here we see the head. Here are the two arms. Here is the heart. Here are the two legs. Here are the sexual organs. And the only one that surprises people is Malchut is connected to the mouth. But here it's also the feet, because everything rests on Malchut. But here we see that when we talk about being in the image of God, so we know that that doesn't mean physically, because of course God has no physical form whatsoever. Nonetheless, we are taught in Kabbalah that the human body, it's not, let's say, by coincidence. There's a deep symmetry that connects it to the Sefirot, because the Sefirot is the flow chart. And also, just like from the head controls everything else. Everything that's going on in the body is actually happening in the head. And of course, life force is flowing from the heart and the blood. So this is a very, very important thing. The Zohar used this chart as its main way of referring to the Sefirot. So in the Zohar, many times it won't say Chesed or Gevura. It will say the right or the left. Or it won't say Teferet, it will say the heart. And Netzach, it will say the right leg or the left leg. Or the Moach, the brain, without saying Keter. But it's a reference to the Sefirot. Our next one is, of course, again, one of Rav Ginsburg's main innovative ideas, where, again, it wasn't his idea, but he organized it. This is true of so many things, is there's wisdom out there, but if you package it and you organize it in a way that people can understand, so you in a sense, you didn't innovate anything, you just put it together, and that's the innovation. The media is the message. So here we see what are called the inner dimensions of all of the Sefirot. And this is totally based on Chassidut, as we learned that the Zohar referred to the Sefirot more on the actual body as a reference to the Sefirot, and Chassidut took the inner psyche of a human being, the inner psychology, and arrange it according to the Sefirot, because this brings it home to us. This is very, very personal, how we can understand the Sefirot. Okay, here, this is a very, very interesting one. This is one of the last portions of the Torah, begins with all of these Hebrew words. This is like a flow chart. And here, there's obvious connections to the Sefirot. So I'll just read it in English, but like I said, this is the actual verse in the Torah, but when you analyze the verse, you can understand it as a flow chart, in a sense, from above to below. So this is just the idea of what's called a flow chart, is showing that here you see a verse in the Torah, but if you deeply analyze it, you see that it's actually a revelation, in a sense, of the Sefirot. And I've mentioned this before, when you learn the Zohar, they relate everything to the Sefirot. Everything is through the lens, through the perspective of the Sefirot, because they took quite seriously the idea that everything in the world is built from the Sefirot and the letters. So here, I'm going to just read it in English. You are all standing this day before Hashem, your God. So of course, Hashem is Keter. And here it says, the leaders, actually it's your leaders of your tribes, your elders and your officers, every man of Israel, your young children, the women, and the convert who is within your camp, both your woodcutters and your water drawers. So here, this is like a holistic look at all of Israel. You have the leaders, you have the men, you have the women, you have the children, you have the converts, you have the wise people, you have the courts and the officers. This is the picture of Am Yisrael, all in one verse, flowing through the Sefirot. Now, in the Tikkunei Zohar, there's a very similar idea. It's not a verse, but they took different terms that refer to different people in Israel, and the Zohar arranges them according to the Sefirot. And this one is a very obvious one. So it begins with Roshei Alfei Yisrael, the heads of Israel thousands, because Keter is the Rosh, the heads, the leaders of Israel is connected to Keter. Then you have in Chachma, you have the Chachamim, you have the wise, the same word. In Bina, you have what are called the Nevonim, the ones who understand. And these are all terms found in the Bible, in the Tanakh. Chesed is obvious. Chassidim. The word chassid, chassidut, comes from chesed. So chassidim are in chesed. Then you have the mighty ones, the giborim, in gevura. And here the masters of Torah are Sefirot, ma'arei Torah. Like we saw in the Jewish experience, this were all the mitzvot. So here the masters of Torah are the ones who can teach the people how to do the mitzvot, how to practically do the mitzvot. In Netzach, we have the prophets, Nevi'im. In Hod, we have the Chozim. And this is because, for those who have been following all the classes, we mentioned that prophecy comes from Netzach and Hod. And so here, the Zohar acknowledges that the prophets are very connected to Netzach, and they're called the seers. The ones who can see into the future are Hod. Tzadikim is Yesod, because we have a verse, Tzadik Yesod Olam. The Tzadik, the righteous one, is the foundation of the world. That's Yesod. And then, of course, the kings are Malachim, which is Malchut. So this chart is like super obvious, but again, it's an idea of trying to take all different segments of the Jewish people and showing their connection to the Sefirot. Now, the next one is also a very important one. And I believe when we get into the names of God, we will go over this, but there are 9 vowels in the Hebrew language. And here, according to Kabbalah, this is a very old tradition, how the vowels are connected to the different Sefirot. We're not going to go into it, but those who delve very deeply into the words and the letters and the Sefirot of the Torah, the vowels are extremely important, and they, without the vowels, we can't even say the words. You have individual letters, but there's no movement. And that's why sometimes the vowels are called tenuot, like the movers. They move the energy from letter to letter to allow us to have a word, which then is a concept. So here are the 9. Malchut has no, here it says no sign, but it's really that all of the vowels combine into Malchut. And we actually started learning about him on Sunday. Avraham Abulafia, one of the greatest Kabbalists, he used the vowels in his different meditations. And so he like really concentrated on them and gave them like deep meaning and form. Now the next one, this is where we're going to starting next week. These are different names of God. And this comes from a book called Sharei Ora by Rabbi Yosef ben Avram Gikatalia, or Gikatalia. And he wrote a book in the 1300s called Sharei Ora. And he was the first one to like write it down. Again, these are ancient traditions, but so much of it was oral, where he wrote a whole book explaining the connection between different names of God and the Sefirot. And it was an extremely influential book that had a tremendous influence on later Kabbalists. This, starting next week, we're beginning a new series called The Meaning of the Names of God. Okay, now here, this is a very interesting. This here is part of the morning prayers, and here again, it's taken from Divrei Hayamim, and actually we mentioned this in our very first class when we discussed where are the sources of the concept of the Sefirot and the names of the Sefirot in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Tanakh. And this is one of the ones that we discussed in our very first class. This is from Divrei Hayamim, and this is it goes through the Sefirot. I'll read it in Hebrew. Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Avinu me'olam v'ad olam, L'cha Hashem hagedula. I'm going to point out that in the really ancient Kabbalah, Chesed was also referred to as Gedula, the great mitzvah. Chesed was considered the great mitzvah. So L'cha Hashem hagedula, v'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'hahod. Here we have in one place the names of the Sefirot. Here, ki kol b'shmayim ba'aretz, because everything in heaven and earth. So it's brought down that the words ki kol, that everything together in gematria equals yesod, equals yesod. And then it says l'cha Hashem hamamlacha v'aminaseh l'kol harosh, because to you Hashem is the kingship. So this is obviously Malchut. This is just one example of, and there are many prayers that this is done in the Kavanot of different Kabbalists, where different prayers are explained, again, like a flow chart. And so when we say these, we have the kavana of kind of bringing down the energy through the Sefirot, through the words of prayer. This again is the Torah Academy. We did this last week. And here again, we could even compare. Here we had education and economics, the same in the Jewish experience. Here we had faith, which was same. Art and music were connected. So in a certain way, this chart and the one we did tonight is the most all-inclusive of all the models that Rabbi Ginsburg has developed. This also we learned. If you remember, we went through the idea of living in divine space, of taking the 6 constant mitzvot as taught by the Rambam, and connecting it to a sefira, connecting it to a direction, of course, connecting it to the inner sense of each of the sefirot, connecting it to the personality who represents, or is what's called the Merkava, the chariot of these energies. And remember, we learned that you take all of this. This is a meditation that can be done any time of the year, but we took it and we explained how shaking the lulav to the 6 directions and then bringing it into the heart. This represents creating a divine space, and it's very, very much connected on the Sefirot and their connection to the different directions and the different personalities.